The Droo Empire was vast and cold, spanning across countless star systems with technology far surpassing anything the galaxy had seen for millennia. They considered themselves the rightful rulers of the cosmos. Their ships were giant, their weapons devastating, their soldiers ruthless. And when they set their sights on Earth, they saw nothing but an easy conquest, a planet teeming with primitive life forms that could be crushed beneath their boots without a second thought. The people of Earth were unprepared. They had no defenses against an enemy of this magnitude. Their governments were disorganized, their military forces outdated, and their technology lagging centuries behind the galactic powers that roamed the stars. But in the quiet corners of Earth, where diplomats and scientists worked tirelessly to understand the universe, something stirred, a warning sent from an unknown source that would change everything. The message arrived without fanfare, a single encrypted transmission that caught the attention of Ambassador Sarah Quinn, working late in the United Nations building on a stormy evening. She was a diplomat by nature, trained to handle crises and delicate negotiations, but the message she intercepted was unlike anything she had ever encountered. It contained only a single line of text, a warning written in perfect English, clear and direct. Do not underestimate humanity. We have survived countless enemies and will do the same to you. There was no return address, no signature, just those words, and an ominous feeling that crept up her spine. She immediately attempted to trace the origin of the transmission, but it had been masked expertly. It was as though it had appeared from thin air. Despite her efforts, the message remained elusive. Sarah could not shake the sense of foreboding that washed over her, but she was a woman of action. She understood the weight of her responsibility more than anyone else. This was not just a random threat. It was a message directed at the incoming Droo Empire fleet already en route to Earth. She knew that humanity's best chance at survival was to act swiftly and decisively, yet the world was still blissfully unaware of the true danger that loomed on the horizon. She turned to her superiors, and after careful consideration she made the difficult decision to send a reply to the Droo through a secure communication channel, one they could not ignore. The message she crafted was simple and to the point. We are not as weak as you think. If you come for us, you will regret it. With that, Sarah Quinn sealed the message and sent it out into the void, hoping against hope that the Droo would listen, though deep down she knew that the galaxy's greatest empire would never take a threat from such an insignificant species seriously. The message was sent, but it didn't matter how carefully it was worded or how urgent it sounded, because the Droo would dismiss it as nothing more than the desperate words of a primitive race they had conquered countless times before, but they had no idea what humanity was capable of, what drove them to survive against all odds. The message would not reach its intended audience for long enough to make a difference, but the seeds of defiance had been planted, and though the Droo would soon learn how dangerous that mistake was, humanity's response would not be one of fear or surrender. It would be one of fire and fury. They had been warned, and now the reckoning would begin. The invasion began without warning, but not without preparation. The Droo fleet emerged from hyperspace on the edge of Earth's atmosphere, a vast armada of warships with cloaking technology that rendered them nearly invisible to the naked eye. Earth's radar systems picked up the ships too late to mount any meaningful defense. The moment the fleet entered orbit, they unleashed their assault. The Droo were not subtle in their approach. Their ships glowed with menacing energy as they dropped massive landing pods over major cities across the globe. The invasion force consisted of well-trained warriors equipped with weapons capable of cutting through the best human armor and technology with ease. They had come to conquer and subjugate humanity with the precision of a predator stalking its prey. The first strike was brutal. Thousands of civilians perished in the initial bombardment of New York City, Paris, Tokyo, and countless other urban centers as Droo soldiers descended and began taking control. Human governments scrambled to respond, but the chaos was overwhelming. Their systems were antiquated in comparison to the Droo's advanced weaponry, and the speed at which the alien forces operated left little time for effective coordination or planning. Yet in the midst of the chaos, something unexpected happened. A spark ignited in the human spirit. The panic did not last long. The people of Earth began to resist. General Michael Drake stood at the helm of a small command center deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, his face illuminated by the glow of multiple screens, his mind racing to devise a plan to turn the tide against an enemy that seemed all but invincible. He had led military campaigns before, but nothing like this. Humanity's survival was at stake, and they had no choice but to fight back. Drake had seen the potential in humanity long before the invasion began. While others doubted their ability to defend against an alien empire, he had always believed in the strength of the human spirit. The Droo may have superior weapons and technology, but they underestimated something crucial: the willpower of ordinary people facing insurmountable odds. "We don't stand a chance unless we adapt and fight in ways they don't expect," he said as he briefed his team of military strategists. His plan was simple but dangerous. He would lead an assault team into the heart of the alien forces using guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run strikes, and surprise ambushes to weaken the invaders and disrupt their supply lines. They couldn't match the Droo in direct combat, but they could outthink and outmaneuver them. In the field, they could turn their enemy's confidence into a deadly weakness. Meanwhile, across the globe in cities like London, Beijing, and Sydney, pockets of resistance began to form. People took up arms with whatever they could find. Some were soldiers, others were ordinary civilians who had no experience with warfare but were determined to protect their homes and families. The sheer unpredictability of human behavior left the Droo commanders frustrated and bewildered. But the most shocking development came when a small group of engineers in New York managed to hack into one of the Droo's drones and reverse engineer its systems with this new technology. They crafted makeshift EMP devices capable of disabling Droo machinery long enough to inflict significant damage on their forces. It was only a small victory, but it was enough to signal a change. The humans were not helpless. They were learning, they were adapting. The Droo did not realize how dangerous this was in their minds. They had already won. They had already conquered countless worlds far more advanced than Earth, and the humans would be no different. But what the Droo didn't account for was the unpredictable nature of humanity when pushed to the brink of extinction. And as the first resistance strikes began to land on Droo patrols and convoys, the message became clear. The warning sent by Sarah Quinn was no empty threat. Humanity would not bow to conquerors. No matter how powerful, they would fight back, and they would make the Droo regret underestimating them. As the human resistance gained momentum, the Droo found themselves caught off guard by the unrelenting spirit of Earth's inhabitants. What had started as a small, disorganized rebellion quickly evolved into a formidable force. The Droo, who had believed their conquest of Earth would be swift and simple, now faced an enemy they couldn't quite comprehend. The humans were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting with an intensity born from desperation, pride, and an unwavering determination to protect their home. General Michael Drake, leading the charge from the front lines, had grown increasingly confident in humanity's ability to resist. The guerrilla tactics his team had developed were proving more effective than anyone had anticipated. With every skirmish won, the morale of the resistance grew stronger, and the Droo's sense of invulnerability began to crack. But Drake knew the real battle was far from over. They had won some early victories, yes, but the Droo Empire still controlled vast swaths of Earth. If they were to win this war, humanity needed more than just courage. They needed knowledge, and they needed it fast. Back in the heart of the Human Resistance Network, Dr. Elena Reyes, a brilliant scientist and engineer, had been working tirelessly to decode the Droo's advanced technology. The weapons and shields they had encountered were far beyond anything Earth's best minds could design, but Reyes believed that if they could understand just one piece of Droo technology, they could level the playing field. It wasn't about matching the enemy's power. It was about finding their weakness. Then, after weeks of painstaking research, Dr. Reyes made a breakthrough. She discovered a pattern in the energy signatures of the Droo shields, a weakness that could be exploited. The shields were not impenetrable. They had specific vulnerabilities that could be neutralized with the right technology. The problem was, the technology to exploit this weakness didn't exist, at least not on Earth. However, the resistance had already begun using whatever resources they could scrounge, repurposing Droo tech from the battlefield and adapting it to their needs. Rise was determined to reverse engineer the necessary components, but it would take time. In the meantime, the resistance continued to disrupt the Droo's operations wherever possible. Small but impactful victories were achieved, each one chipping away at the invaders' control. A key moment came when a group of resistance fighters in Chicago successfully hijacked a Droo supply ship. Inside, they found a treasure trove of weapons, fuel, and most importantly, more Droo communication devices. These devices were critical, not only for planning attacks, but also for intercepting enemy transmissions. The more the humans learned about the Droo's tactics and communication protocols, the more they could anticipate their moves and counter them effectively. But the tide was not turning quickly enough for some. A faction of Earth's governments, now under increasing pressure from their own citizens, demanded a more aggressive approach. They wanted a direct assault on the Droo's central command. They wanted to strike at the heart of the empire and force a surrender. General Drake, however, cautioned against such a plan. The Droo were not only formidable on the battlefield, but their leaders were ruthless tacticians. A direct attack without a solid strategy could spell the end of humanity's fragile hope. As the resistance built momentum, the Droo were beginning to feel the pressure. Lord Maverick, the ruthless commander of the Droo forces, had watched as the humans fought back with unexpected tenacity. He had underestimated them, thinking they would cower in the face of overwhelming force. But Maverick was no fool. He knew that the longer this conflict dragged on, the more dangerous the humans would become. He ordered his forces to step up their operations, to crush the resistance before it could grow any stronger. The Droo launched a series of retaliatory strikes, targeting key human strongholds and trying to push the resistance back into the shadows. The battle for Earth had reached a new level of intensity, and both sides were locked in a deadly game of cat and mouse. While the humans fought with determination, the Droo showed no mercy. Every victory, no matter how small, was hard-won. In the midst of this, Sarah Quinn, the UN ambassador who had sent the warning to the Droo, continued her diplomatic efforts, reaching out to any alien species that might be willing to aid Earth's cause. Yet, despite her efforts, few responded. The galaxy had seen many species rise and fall, but none had dared to challenge the might of the Droo Empire. Would humanity's defiance be enough to turn the tide, or would Earth fall, as so many others had before it? The war had only just begun, and the cost was already staggering. But the humans, driven by a primal will to survive, refused to give in. They would fight, adapt, and prove to the galaxy that humanity was a force not to be trifled with. And soon, they would make the Droo regret ever underestimating them. The tide of war shifted once again, but this time the human resistance wasn't simply reacting to the Droo's moves. They were starting to take the initiative. The surprise had been lost for the most part, but humanity's resolve and growing ingenuity were proving to be a formidable force. What the Droo had initially dismissed as a primitive species was now forcing them to confront a much more dangerous enemy. The human spark, once a flicker, had become a roaring flame that could not be easily extinguished. General Drake stood at the front lines of a small makeshift base, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, overseeing the latest human strike operation. His eyes, once clouded with doubt in the early days of the war, now shone with a renewed sense of purpose. The resistance had grown stronger, more coordinated, and with each victory, their confidence grew. They had learned to adapt, to turn the enemy's superior technology against them, and they had learned to fight in ways the Droo hadn't anticipated. Dr. Elena Reyes had become their secret weapon. Her discovery of the Droo shield vulnerability had been a turning point. The humans now had the ability to disable Droo energy barriers long enough to launch effective strikes. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was enough to keep the invaders on their toes. For every step the Droo took forward, humanity pushed them back, slowly but surely. Dr. Rice wasn't alone in her work. A team of engineers, hackers, and military strategists had come together to reverse engineer more Droo technology. It was a monumental task, but each success, no matter how small, gave humanity more tools to fight with. The Droo were no longer facing just soldiers. They were facing a united global force, working with an ingenuity they had never encountered before. Yet even as humanity gained ground, the war was taking its toll. Cities had been reduced to rubble, millions of lives had been lost, and entire nations were on the brink of collapse. The cost of resistance was steep, but the spirit of humanity refused to break. Each loss, each sacrifice, only fueled their determination to protect their planet. The most important shift in the war, however, was the unity that had emerged from the chaos. The nations of Earth, once divided by political conflicts and distrust, now stood together as one. There were no more borders, no more divisions. The human race had been forced to confront a common enemy, and in doing so, they had united in a way that no one could have imagined before the invasion. The Droo had unknowingly forged a stronger, more resilient humanity by underestimating them. But with every victory, there came new risks. The Droo, furious at their failure to crush the resistance, began to escalate their tactics. Lord Maverick, the ruthless commander, was growing impatient. He had watched as his forces were slowly bled dry by the persistent human attacks. Now he would stop at nothing to crush them. Maverick unleashed a new weapon, a deadly fleet of warships equipped with devastating particle beams capable of decimating entire cities in seconds. His forces began to concentrate their attacks on Earth's remaining strongholds, hoping to break humanity's will once and for all. General Drake knew this was coming. He had seen the signs and prepared for it. It was no longer just about fighting back. It was about taking the war to the Droo themselves. The Resistance had built a small fleet of their own, using stolen Droo ships and technology. The time had come for a direct assault on the enemy's forces, a mission to strike at the heart of the Droo command. In a War Council meeting held in an underground bunker, Drake addressed his team. "We've been playing defense long enough," he said. "The time for hitting them where it hurts is now. We're going to take the fight to them, to their home front. We've got the tech, we got the skills, and we got the will to win." The plan was bold. It would require the Resistance to infiltrate a heavily fortified Droo flagship and disable their primary communications and weapons systems. If they succeeded, it would create a ripple effect throughout the entire fleet, disrupting their ability to fight back and possibly forcing the Droo to retreat. It was the kind of mission that could win the war, but it could also end in disaster. The decision was made, and the mission was set into motion. The Resistance fighters gathered their strength, preparing for the most dangerous operation humanity had ever attempted. They would infiltrate the heart of the enemy's power and strike at the core of the Droo Empire, sending a message that Earth was no longer a target. It was a force to be reckoned with. The battle lines were drawn. The next phase of the war would begin with a single, decisive strike. The humans were no longer fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. And the Droo would soon learn that underestimating humanity had been their greatest mistake. The operation was underway, and the stakes had never been higher. General Michael Drake's plan to strike at the heart of the Droo Empire was bold, but it was the only hope left for humanity. The Resistance had spent months preparing for this moment, gathering intelligence, perfecting their tactics, and bolstering their fleet with stolen Droo technology. The time had come to show the invaders that they had underestimated humanity, and the consequences of that mistake would be dire. The target was the Droo flagship, Ravager, a massive vessel capable of annihilating entire continents with a single blow. It was the nerve center of the Droo's military operations on Earth, and taking it out could cripple their ability to coordinate attacks. The mission was simple in theory: infiltrate the flagship, disable its weapons and communications systems, and escape before the fleet could retaliate. But as with all missions of this scale, the risks were staggering. Drake and his elite team of soldiers, engineers, and tacticians would board a human-modified Droo shuttle, using the very technology that had once been their enemy's advantage. The shuttle had been outfitted with a cloaking device that would allow it to slip past the flagship's defenses undetected. But it was only a temporary solution. Once inside the flagship's hull, the team would have mere minutes to reach their objectives and plant the sabotage devices that would disable the ship's core systems. Failure was not an option. The Ravager was a symbol of the Droo's superiority, and its destruction would be a blow they could not recover from. Dr. Elena Reyes, having perfected the sabotage technology, worked feverishly alongside the Resistance's engineers to ensure the mission's success. Her eyes flickered over the complex schematics of the Droo ship, each line and symbol revealing a crucial vulnerability. The team's primary objective was to target the ship's central reactor, a massive energy core that powered both its shields and weapons. If they could overcharge the core and destabilize it, the resulting explosion would cripple the flagship and send a shockwave of destruction through the entire Droo fleet. But such a feat required precise execution. The slightest misstep could set off alarms and lead to a swift, catastrophic end. As the shuttle approached the Ravager, Drake's heart pounded in his chest. He looked over his team, veteran soldiers, tech experts, and civilians who had become warriors in the last desperate months of the war. There was no turning back now. "We do this together," Drake said quietly. "We take that ship down, and we send them a message they'll never forget." The shuttle breached the Ravager's outer hull without detection, its cloaking device working perfectly. They had a small window to infiltrate before the Droo realized what was happening. The team moved swiftly through the ship's corridors, using the same guerrilla tactics they had perfected on Earth. Quiet, efficient, and precise. They encountered little resistance at first, as the Droo were focused on preparing for their next large-scale attack against humanity's remaining strongholds. But as they neared the heart of the flagship, the first sign of danger appeared. A group of Droo soldiers rounded a corner, spotting the intruders too late. Gunfire erupted in the narrow corridor, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. The Resistance fighters took cover, returning fire with deadly accuracy. In the chaos, one of the team members, Sergeant Carla Hughes, was hit. A cry of pain echoed through the comms, but she refused to retreat, pressing on despite the wound. "We've got no time to waste," Drake barked, his voice steady. "Keep moving." With the enemy temporarily neutralized, the team pressed on toward the reactor. They'd reached the central chamber, where the heart of the ship pulsed with dangerous energy. Rice quickly set to work, using her knowledge of Droo technology to interface with the ship's systems. Her hands flew over the interface, her mind focused entirely on the task. The countdown was already ticking, and they had precious little time. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship, signaling the breach. The Droo were awake, and they were coming for them. Nearly there, Rice shouted as she worked, her voice strained. "I just need another minute." But the minute they didn't have. As the team prepared for the worst, General Drake ordered an immediate extraction. The team would have to fight their way out of the flagship, but with the sabotage set in place, the victory was already assured. The Ravager would burn, and with it, the Droo's hopes of crushing humanity. The final moments of the mission were a blur of chaos, gunfire, explosions, and the rapid pace of survival. The team fought tooth and nail, making their way back to the shuttle. And as they reached the safety of their craft, the first explosion rocked the Ravager. The reactor core destabilized, sending shockwaves through the flagship. The Ravager was doomed. As the shuttle blasted away, the Resistance watched the massive explosion from the safety of space. The flagship was no more, and the Droo had just lost their most powerful weapon. The battle for Earth had shifted in humanity's favor, and far below, on the surface of the planet, a new hope was born. The fight was far from over, but the humans had just proven something monumental. They could strike at the heart of the enemy, and they could win. The explosion that ripped through the Ravager was a spectacular sight, a brilliant flash of light that lit up the void of space like a dying star. The shockwave that followed sent a ripple through the Droo fleet, and for the first time since the invasion began, there was an undeniable sense of panic among the alien forces. Lord Maverick, watching from the command center aboard his flagship, felt the tremor in his gut. His most powerful vessel, the heart of his campaign against Earth, had just been destroyed. His pride, his symbol of superiority, was gone. In the aftermath of the explosion, chaos spread throughout the Droo fleet. Communications were disrupted, weapons systems began to malfunction, and several smaller ships experienced power surges that sent them spiraling into the void. For the Droo, this was no mere tactical setback. It was a crisis that threatened the entire war effort. But Lord Maverick was not one to show weakness. His anger flared like a wildfire, and he vowed to crush the human resistance with even more brutal force. He would not allow one setback to spell the end of the Droo Empire's ambition. On Earth, however, the destruction of the Ravager sent shockwaves of hope through the human resistance. The Sabotage mission, though costly, had been a resounding success. General Michael Drake, along with the rest of his team, had returned to Earth as heroes, and their victory was celebrated across the planet. Yet, despite the victory, Drake knew that the war was far from over. The Droo would retaliate with everything they had, and humanity's resources were limited. In the command center of the human resistance, Drake stood in front of a large map of Earth, the continents and battle zones lit up in red and blue. His mind raced as he analyzed the situation. The destruction of the Ravager had certainly struck a blow to the Droo, but they were still a formidable enemy. Their advanced technology and overwhelming numbers meant that humanity couldn't afford to rest on their laurels. "We've got one shot at this," Drake said to his team, his voice calm but filled with an intensity that matched the gravity of the situation. "The Droo will regroup, and when they do, they'll hit us harder than ever. We need to keep the pressure on them before they can fully recover. Our next move has to be decisive." Dr. Elena Reyes, her face still pale from the earlier mission, looked up from the tactical displays. "We've damaged their flagship, but that's just one ship. They still have fleets, weapons, and soldiers on the ground. We need to disrupt their operations further, cripple their command structure. We don't have the luxury of waiting for them to fall apart," said Colonel Alan Walker, a seasoned military strategist. "We need to go on the offensive. If we can target their command centers, their power grids, and disrupt their supply lines, we can keep them off balance." "Agreed," Drake said. "We hit them where it hurts, right at their infrastructure. If we can keep their forces scattered and disorganized, we may have a chance to break their hold on Earth." The next phase of the war would require more than just guerrilla tactics and small-scale sabotage. Humanity was preparing for full-scale operations that would challenge the very core of the Droo's control over Earth. But with the loss of the Ravager, and the momentum now in their favor, Earth's resistance had something the Droo had never expected: the element of surprise. As preparations for the next wave of attacks began, the resistance also focused on strengthening their global alliances. Though many alien species had watched from the sidelines, there were whispers of those who had grown disillusioned with the Droo Empire. Some were reluctant to intervene, but others began to see the tide turning in humanity's favor. Sarah Quinn, the UN ambassador who had first warned the Droo of Earth's strength, worked tirelessly to forge new alliances, hoping to turn the war into a truly intergalactic struggle against the invaders. Meanwhile, the Droo Empire was tightening its grip on Earth's remaining occupied territories. Lord Maverick was preparing a brutal counteroffensive, one that would show humanity the full might of the Droo's power. His forces were already gathering for a final, all-out assault on the Resistance's strongholds. He knew that if the humans were allowed to keep the momentum going, their chances of victory would increase exponentially. His pride demanded that Earth's conquest be completed. As the Droo fleet regrouped and prepared for the coming battle, the humans knew they had only one choice: to keep fighting, to keep pushing forward. They had tasted victory, but the war was far from over. The next few months would determine the fate of Earth, and if humanity could endure, they would not only secure their planet, they would send a message to the galaxy. Humanity had survived the invasion, and now they would rise to become a force no empire could ignore. The days following the destruction of the Ravager were filled with tension. The human resistance had made a bold statement, but the Droo were not defeated. The alien fleet, though shaken, had begun to regroup with frightening speed, and Lord Maverick's response was swift and merciless. He dispatched reinforcements, reinvigorated by his own wrath and a desire to restore his fallen empire's reputation. He believed that humanity's resistance was just a fluke, an annoyance that would soon be crushed under the weight of Droo military might. General Michael Drake, however, had a different view. He knew that the loss of the Ravager had crippled the Droo's ability to command their forces effectively, but it hadn't broken their will. Humanity's next move had to be a calculated strike that would prevent the Droo from consolidating their strength and launching a devastating counteroffensive. As Drake gathered his top commanders in a secure bunker beneath the mountains of Colorado, he laid out his strategy. "We hit them before they can regroup," Drake said, his voice steady and resolute. "We can't give them time to rebuild their command structure. We need to take out their communications and power grid, sow chaos and confusion across their ranks. If we strike fast and hard, we might just have a chance at turning the tide." The room was silent as the others absorbed his words. They all knew the risks. If the operation failed, it could lead to catastrophic losses, and humanity's window of opportunity would slam shut. But for Drake and his commanders, there was no alternative. The human race had to take the fight to the Droo. Dr. Elena Reyes, now fully recovered from her earlier injuries, spoke up. "We've learned a lot from their tech, but we need more firepower. If we can capture another Droo warship or gain control of more of their systems, it would give us an edge. But that means going into the heart of their territory, where they're the most fortified." Colonel Alan Walker nodded, his expression grim. "The risks are high, but the potential rewards are worth it. If we can cripple their infrastructure and take out key targets, it might just buy us enough time to organize a full-scale assault." The decision was made. The next target would be a Droo command facility on the outskirts of a major human city, one that had been under Droo control since the initial invasion. It was a well-guarded compound, and infiltrating it would be no small feat. But the resistance had learned how to operate in the shadows, how to blend into the wreckage left by the Droo, and strike when they least expected it. The operation would begin at dusk. A small, elite team of resistance fighters would slip past enemy patrols, infiltrate the facility, and plant explosive devices on key communication and power systems. They would disable the facility's defenses long enough to create a diversion, allowing larger units to move in and deal the finishing blow. As the night fell, the first phase of the plan unfolded. General Drake's team moved with precision through the ruins of the city, using the chaos of the ongoing war to their advantage. They crept past Droo patrols, taking out sentries silently, leaving no trace of their presence. It was an intricate dance of stealth, speed, and deadly force, one that had become second nature to the resistance. The team reached the perimeter of the Droo command facility, a sprawling complex surrounded by heavily armed sentries and automated defenses. The resistance fighters had been preparing for this moment for weeks, studying the facility's layout, learning its security protocols, and anticipating every move the Droo might make. Dr. Rice, leading the technical team, worked quickly to hack into the facility's security systems. "Give me a minute," she muttered, her fingers flying across the interface of a captured Droo device. "We need to disable their surveillance, or we'll never get past the main entrance." The seconds ticked by like hours. The tension was palpable as the rest of the team waited, weapons at the ready. Finally, Rise looked up, a determined smile on her face. "We're in. The cameras are down, and the security grid is offline. You've got a clear path." With that, the team moved forward, breaching the compound and planting their charges. They set explosives on key communication arrays and power generators, ensuring that the entire facility would be incapacitated. The plan was simple: disrupt everything, create chaos, and get out before the Droo realized what was happening. But just as they finished their task, the ground shook. The facility's alarms blared, and a loud voice echoed over the intercom. Intruders detected. All units mobilize. The Droo had found them. The resistance team quickly retreated, but the clock was ticking. They had moments before the facility's defenses came online again, and the Droo would be hot on their heels. It was a race against time. Explosions rang out in the distance, signaling the success of the diversion. But as the team sprinted toward their extraction point, they could hear the thundering footsteps of Droo soldiers behind them, closing in fast. General Drake knew they had to get out, but not before delivering one final message. As he reached the extraction zone, he looked up at the stars, knowing that the war was far from over. The fight for Earth was reaching its climax, and every victory would cost lives. But humanity had already proven one thing: they would not go quietly into the night. They would fight to the end. The extraction was chaotic, but the resistance team had done it. They had planted the charges, disrupted the Droo's critical command center, and created enough confusion to send the invaders into disarray. As the team finally regrouped at their rendezvous point, their shuttle arriving just in time, General Michael Drake allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The mission had been a success, but that relief was fleeting. The war was far from over, and the resistance knew the true test was still ahead. The explosions they had triggered rocked the Droo command facility, sending massive plumes of smoke into the sky. The power grid and communication networks were down, but the chaos wouldn't last long. The Droo were not a race easily dissuaded by setbacks. They would recover, reorganize, and counterattack. It was only a matter of time before they retaliated with overwhelming force. "We've made a dent, but we need to keep the pressure on," Drake said, his voice firm as he addressed his commanders on the shuttle. "The Droo won't let this go unanswered. We have to hit them harder now, before they can regroup." Dr. Elena Reyes, her face flushed with the adrenaline of the mission, nodded. "We've disabled a critical part of their infrastructure, but they still have plenty of backup systems. We've disrupted their communications, but they'll adapt. If we can hit their energy supply next, it might cripple their entire war effort. If we can break their energy infrastructure, we cut off their ability to maintain their fleet and command structure." Colonel Alan Walker spoke up, his voice sharp. "That's the key. We don't need to destroy everything. We need to make them bleed, to force them into a position where they can't fight back effectively. We're playing the long game now. We've already taken out their flagship, disrupted their command center, and crippled their supply lines. Now we need to finish it." Drake met each of his team members' eyes, the weight of their mission pressing heavily on his shoulders. He knew they were walking a razor's edge. The risks of their next moves would be greater than ever before, but they had no choice. The fate of Earth hung in the balance. As the shuttle cut through the night sky and back into the Resistance's hidden base, preparations were already underway for the next phase. The damage they had caused to the Droo's infrastructure had already begun to show results. The invaders had become disorganized, their fleet scattered and their ground forces struggling to respond to the rising tide of human-led assaults. The Resistance had a window of opportunity, and they would not waste it. General Drake stood in front of a holographic map of Earth, the image flickering with intelligence reports from the battlefield. He was joined by his senior officers and strategists. The plan was set. The final assault would target the heart of the Droo fleet, taking out their last remaining operational capital ships and forcing Lord Maverick's forces into retreat. It was a risky move, but it was their best chance for victory. The human forces had become more coordinated with each passing day, and Earth's global resistance network was now working as a unified front. "We have one shot at this," Drake said, his voice grim. "We hit their fleet, we take out their remaining capital ships, and we forced them into retreat. It's time to finish this. We do it for every person who's fallen, for every city that's been destroyed. We do it for Earth. The mission was set. The human resistance would launch an all-out assault on the heart of the Droo's fleet, knowing that it would be their last chance to defeat the invaders once and for all. But the resistance was ready. Humanity had faced the impossible and survived. And now, they would show the galaxy just how much they were capable of. As the final preparations were made, a broadcast came through the Resistance's secure channels. A message from Sarah Quinn, the UN ambassador. Her voice, filled with conviction, rang out across Earth's broadcast systems. To all the people of Earth, you've fought, you've bled, you've shown the universe that humanity will not be erased. This fight is not just for our survival, it's for the future of every species who values freedom. The Droo thought we were weak. They thought they could crush us. But they were wrong. We will stand united, and we will drive them from our home. Victory is within our grasp. The message reverberated through every human stronghold. It was the spark humanity needed, one final rallying cry to ignite the flames of resistance. The war for Earth had reached its climax. The Droo had underestimated humanity at every turn, and now they would face the consequences. The human forces readied themselves for the final assault. There was no turning back. This time, victory was not just a hope. It was a certainty. And when the dust settled, the galaxy would remember one undeniable truth. Humanity was a force to be reckoned with, and the Droo Empire would never forget the day they underestimated Earth.